Meanwhile, the presidential candidates are also weighing in on the recent attacks in New York and New Jersey. Last night, in fact, Donald Trump used the incidents to defend racial profiling.
I'm not using the term Muslim. I'm saying you're going to have to profile. We're going to have to start profiling. And it's a, I don't know if it's that bad, but certainly it's not a wonderful thing. But we have a country to keep safe.
Hillary Clinton has since fired back against her Republican rival. She argues that Trump's ideas really fuel terrorist propaganda.
We know that a lot of the rhetoric we've heard from Donald Trump has been seized on by terrorists, in particular ISIS, because they are looking to make this into a war against Islam.
All of this does come as Clinton appears to have regained at least some momentum against Trump. You take a look here at a new national poll out today. It shows that she is leading by 5 points in a candidate race. For more on the presidential race, then, we're joined now by Daily Beast political reporter Betsy Woodruff from Washington. Betsy, thank you, as always, for the time. Little rip of sound there as we saw perhaps the inevitable as Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton politicized the events that we saw over the weekend in 3 states. Donald Trump has used it to once again call for profiling. We heard Hillary Clinton really compare some things that Donald Trump has said and done to potentially treasonous acts, saying that he's inspiring ISIS. Of course, that's a claim he has lobbed at her as well. Is this playing as just more noise surrounding these events?
These candidates are never going to let a terror attack go to waste. The reality is that both of them have to be very careful when they're trying to score political points off this, because they both have major weak spots. For example, Hillary Clinton, of course, is correct when she says that ISIS uses Donald Trump to try to recruit. But ISIS has also used Bill Clinton's infidelities in recruitment videos. The reality is that just because ISIS talks about something we do in the United States doesn't necessarily inherently mean it's a bad thing that we shouldn't do. Of course, on Trump's side, I thought his comments last night about how he doesn't necessarily want to use the term Muslim were really kind of funny, because on his website, last that I checked, he actually has a statement calling for a ban on Muslim immigration. The incongruity between what he says when he's on cable and what his official campaign site says is just kind of perplexing and odd. And I guess another example of how much this campaign is really just sort of functioning without regard for basic factual consistency.
Yeah, it certainly seemed he was allowing himself to be led to water, if then letting the leader point to the water in question. Meanwhile, we also heard Donald Trump yesterday, in the hours after Ahmaud Rahami was arrested, denounce and really seemingly bemoan the fact that, among other things, he would be granted legal counsel. Rahami is an American citizen, which makes legal counsel his constitutional right. How do you see it playing out, perhaps beyond just more meat for the base?
It's such an interesting comment for Trump to make. He also, in the wake of these attacks, criticized freedom of expression, suggested that we need to have more curbs on First Amendment freedom of speech rights to try to stop these terror attacks from happening. And it's really interesting because a lot of the Republican base that Trump has really relied on to propel his momentum have been Tea Party type folks who historically have made support for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights a central part of their rhetoric and their messaging. But then the fact that these folks have now rallied behind a candidate who kind of just goes through each amendment in the Bill of Rights and sort of criticizes them one by one is really interesting, I think, and highlights the fact that the Republican base is not nearly as ideologically pure as a number of Republican leaders would want us to expect. The fact that Trump can basically suggest that an American citizen should lose his constitutional rights because he's accused of a crime is really a telling and fascinating comment.
It also seemed perhaps just a bit discordant, and it came on the same day that we learned that more than 800 illegal immigrants had been granted citizenship. But last night, Donald Trump Jr. then weighs in, and he compared the current Syrian refugee program to a bowl of Skittles. I know you've seen it, tweeting again, "If I told you just 3 would kill you, would you take a handful?" It is rather obviously dehumanizing. It obviously skews a ratio that is probably better to, it's roughly 3 and 3 billion. Refugees have, by percentage, committed less crime upon arrival. Does any of that, though, actually matter in terms of holding the campaign, if nothing else, accountable?
It's hard to figure out what matters and what doesn't this close to the election. That said, I think in particular the question of these 800 immigrants accidentally getting citizenship is really interesting because theoretically both sides could use that. Obviously, Trump can talk about amnesty and the need to kick them all out, or whatever term he's using this week to talk about undocumented immigrants. But Clinton can also make the case that this is part of the reason that we need some sort of comprehensive overhaul of the way the immigration system works, because obviously there's something deeply wrong with a system that is so dysfunctional and obsolete that 800 people who had deportation orders, who were supposed to be permanently removed from the country, became citizens. That's a sign that the system doesn't work. But it's going to be interesting if Clinton talks about it. It's a little tough for her to message. The Donald Trump Jr. Skittles comment, I think, just kind of stands alone. It's hard to even think of anything to say about it. I thought Skittles, corporate Skittles response to it was interesting.
Yeah.
They said
Skittles is candy,
Skittles are candy, refugees are people.
Yes.
And we don't think the analogy is appropriate. So, I guess we'll see if that gets legs.
Get you out of here on this one, Betsy. And it comes with news, perhaps, that certain GOP mega donors have pushed now in to the tune of tens of millions of dollars of support for Donald Trump, money that hadn't been there prior. CBS News has obtained a memo from Robbie Mook looking perhaps to remind skittish donors of the Democrats, supporters as well, that regardless of what we may be seeing in the polls and what we may be seeing with regard to donation efforts on the part of the GOP, that there is no path in terms of the Electoral College to victory for Donald Trump. Though it's interesting, this memo in question does ask very simply, and to begin, people have been asking me lately, will the race be close? Is there more we need to be doing? I have a simple answer, yes and yes. What do you make of, if nothing else, of its writing?
I think it suggests or just reaffirms the fact that Democrats are increasingly concerned about this race. The reality is Trump is perceived as just an incredibly weak and flawed candidate. I think this is probably an inside the Beltway, insider political bias, that folks who follow this stuff obsessively don't necessarily understand how Trump plays in quote unquote real America. And the fact that he's been polling so competitively, especially in states like Florida and Ohio, is understandably giving a lot of these Democrat mega donors the jitters. So it makes sense that Robbie Mook would be reaching out to them and saying, don't rest on your laurels. Everybody take this seriously. That said, Mook is correct. Hillary Clinton has an easier path to the White House than Trump does. Any Democrat is going to have an easier path because just of the way that elections work in the U.S., they have an advantage in the Electoral College. That said, of course, the fact that Trump is polling, I think, within the margin of error against Hillary Clinton in Florida in some recent polls, that's a big deal. That's not nothing. So it's understandable that Mook would be reminding his most generous backers that they may need to cough up a little more cash just to be on the safe side.
49 days out, and hey, 6 days out to the first debate. Get the popcorn ready. Betsy Woodruff, as always, we appreciate it.
Sure thing.
6 days until September 26th, when Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump will be going head-to-head, and sans Gary Johnson in the debate at Hofstra University in Hempstead, New York, out on Long Island. It's again Monday, September 26th, 9 p.m. Eastern. You can stream it all right here on CBSN.